Close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath and let your thoughts gently drift back, far beyond time, to a place where names did not yet exist, where there were no dates and no borders. Long before the word Venezuela appeared on maps, long before anyone called this land their own, there was a world that lived in silence. There were no roads here, no cities, no history written in ink. There was only the land. The warm Caribbean Sea slowly touched the shore. Mountains rose toward the sky like sleeping giants. Rivers flowed calmly, unaware that one day they would be given names. The nights were dark, and the stars seemed closer than they do today. In this world, people did not yet think about the future. They simply lived. The first people came here thousands of years ago. They moved slowly, following the animals, the water, the sun. They did not know they were discovering a country. They were simply searching for a home, and the land accepted them. They settled by rivers, in the shade of jungles, on mountain slopes, where the air was cooler and the nights were calmer. Their days began with sunrise and ended by the fire of a campfire. They listened to the wind, watched the birds, learned from nature without trying to change it. In this world, everything had a spirit. The river was alive, the mountain old and wise, the forest a protector. People did not own the land. They were part of it. Centuries passed. Generations replaced one another, like waves on the shore. And gradually tribes were born, each with its own song, its own dreams, its own way of looking at the stars. But there were still no names that we know today. There was only a feeling of belonging, and the silence that wrapped this world like a soft blanket. Sometimes at night, the elders looked up at the sky and told stories about spirits, about the beginning of time, about how humans appeared between heaven and earth. These stories were not written down. They lived in memory, in the voice, in the breath. And as the campfire slowly faded, people fell asleep, not knowing that one day their world would change forever. Night once again descends upon the land. The campfire crackles softly, and time continues its slow journey. Thousands of years had passed since the first people set foot on this land. They were no longer just wanderers. Now they had roots, memory, traditions.
This is how peoples were born. Each of them found a home in a specific place where nature itself suggested how to live. Some chose the coast, where the sea breathed evenly and calmly. Others moved deep into the jungles, where the greenery was thick and the air warm and humid. Others climbed into the mountains, where nights were cool and the stars especially bright. Over time, these peoples became different, yet they were all united by one thing. They lived in harmony with the land. In the north and along the coast lived the people of the sea. They built light canoes that glided silently over the water like shadows. The sea was their road. It fed them, protected them, and taught them patience. They caught fish, gathered shells, knew how to read the waves, and understood when the sea was calm and when it was wiser to stay on shore. Their homes stood close to the water, often on wooden stilts, so that the tides would not disturb their sleep. In the evenings, they gazed at the horizon, where the sun slowly disappeared into the sea, and believed that beyond that edge began the world of spirits. Deeper still, where the jungles grew denser, lived other peoples. Their lives were quieter. They moved carefully, so not to disturb the forest. The forest was their home, their storehouse, and their temple. They knew which plants could heal, which gave strength, and which were better left untouched. They hunted not for sport, but for life, and before taking prey from the forest, they thanked it. From early childhood, their children learned to listen to the rustle of leaves, the cry of birds, the distant sound of rain. Everything around them spoke, and they understood this language. And high in the mountains, where the air was purer and the silence deeper, lived the people of earth and stone. They worked the slopes, created terraces to grow food where it seemed nothing could grow. Their homes were strong, built of stone and clay. They protected against cold and wind. These people thought about the future, about the next season, about children and grandchildren. They believed that time moves in circles and that everything always returns. None of these peoples had writing, but they had memory. Stories were passed on by voice, from elders to the young, from one campfire to another. They spoke of the origin of the world, of great spirits, of how humanity appeared between heaven and earth. Each people saw the world in its own way, yet none of them considered themselves the masters of nature. Humans were guests, temporary, humble. Centuries passed. Life flowed calmly, slowly. People were born, lived, and departed, leaving behind them footprints on the land and stories in memory. They did not know the words gold, empire, conquest, and they could not imagine
that far beyond the horizon, ships were already moving, ships that would one day change this world forever. For now, the night was quiet, the fire was fading, and the land of Venezuela slept peacefully.
To the native peoples, these visitors were strange. Their clothing was heavy, their faces were pale, their movements sharp. They spoke loudly, as if afraid of silence. And to the newcomers, this land seemed like a fairy tale. Green, alive, abundant. They saw rivers and thought of gold. They saw people and thought of power. They did not understand that this world lived by different laws. At first, everything felt like curiosity, like cautious exchange. Food was traded for trinkets, smiles for gestures of peace. But a shadow had already fallen on the shore. The Europeans brought with them not only metal and new words, they brought diseases that had never existed here before. They brought fear, which had once been unknown. They brought the idea that land could be taken. And with each passing day, that idea grew stronger. The people who had lived here for centuries did not understand why their homes suddenly became chujimi, why rivers were given new names, why their world began to shrink.
The shore no longer slept peacefully. The ships returned again and again and again. Each time there were more of them. Silence gave way to noise, the fire of the campfire to the fire of cannons. Old stories once told by the fire began to fade like morning mist, but memory still lived. In the mountains, in the forests, by the rivers, people still remembered the former world. They looked at the stars and could not understand why the sky remained the same, but the land did not. And so a new era began, an era in which Venezuela no longer belonged only to itself. For now, night once again descended upon the land. The sea grew quiet, and even amid change, someone still fell asleep, listening to the wind and hoping that one day the world would return to peace. Time continued to move on, slowly, relentlessly. Ships were no longer a rarity. They arrived again and again, leaving on the shore the traces of an alien world. Thus the land, which for centuries had lived in silence, found itself under the rule of a distant and unfamiliar power. The Spanish Empire. For the empire, this land was far away. For the people who lived here, it was everything. New settlements appeared, They were built with strict rules, straight streets, stone buildings, churches with high walls. The ringing of bells replaced the sound of the forest. Crosses rose above the land, and with them new laws, new words, new fears. For ordinary people, life grew heavier. Many indigenous peoples were forced to work in the fields and in the mines. They grew cacao, coffee, indigo. They worked beneath a sun that showed no mercy. Their days were long, their nights short. Old traditions were forbidden or forgotten. Languages changed. Songs grew quieter. Yet in this world, life remained. At dawn, women walked to the rivers to fetch water. Children ran barefoot along dusty streets. Someone laughed. Someone dreamed. Someone simply survived. In villages and small towns, people found comfort in simple things, in food, in music, in family stories. In the evenings, lights went out early. The sky above Venezuela was still full of stars. And beneath that sky, people whispered old legends, trying not to forget who they were. Colonial rule seemed eternal, heavy like stone. But beneath that stone, something new was slowly growing. Children were born who already knew two worlds: the world of their ancestors and the world of the empire. They spoke another language, wore different clothes, yet in their hearts lived the memory of this land. Decades passed. Governors changed. Laws changed. But simple life remained the same. Work, heat, the silence of night. And somewhere deep within, a feeling began to ripen, one that did not yet have a name. A feeling that this land should belong to those who were born upon it. For now, night once again covered the colonial cities. The bells fell silent, and people fell asleep, not knowing that ahead of them waited the fire of change.
Some more time passed, not years, decades. Colonial cities fell asleep and awoke to the same familiar rhythm. Bells rang, Markets opened. The sun rose over the same streets. But inside people, something was slowly changing. It was not a rebellion. There were no shouts, no loud words. It was a feeling that grew quietly, like a seed beneath the earth. People began to ask themselves questions, not out loud, inside. Why do we obey those who live across the ocean? Why can this land not belong to us? Why are our lives decided by others?
These thoughts spread, not through orders, but through conversations. Behind closed doors, in the evening shadows, during long walks beneath the stars. A new generation was rising in Venezuela. People, born already on this land. They knew it. They felt it. And among them grew a man whose name would become a symbol of hope. Simón Bolívar. He was born into a world where everything seemed decided for him. Yet inside him lived unrest. He saw injustice. He saw the people's exhaustion. He saw how wealth flowed far away, leaving only shadows behind. His path was not easy. He traveled widely. He studied. He listened. And the more he learned, the clearer one truth became. This land must be free. But freedom does not come quickly. It demands time, patience, and sacrifice. The first steps were uncertain, the first attempts painful. The empire was strong, its power seemed unbreakable. There were defeats, there were doubts, there were nights when the dream felt too distant. Yet the idea no longer faded. It lived in the hearts of soldiers, peasants, city dwellers. People who had once remained silent began to believe. The war for independence was long, exhausting. The mountains witnessed marching troops. The rivers heard their footsteps. The fields became witnesses to battles. Yet even within this fire, people remained human. They dreamed of home, of peace, of a simple future. And slowly, the dream began to take shape. At the beginning of the 19th century, Venezuela took a step toward freedom. It was not the end of the road. It was the beginning. Colonial chains began to loosen. The old order started to crack. When independence was declared, it did not bring instant calm. Freedom proved complex, demanding responsibility. But the sky over Venezuela that night seemed especially vast. People looked at the stars and for the first time felt that the future might belong to them. Many hardships still lay ahead, but fear gave way to hope. And as night slowly descended upon the land, Venezuela fell asleep, already changed, free, yet only beginning to understand what it truly meant to be itself.
Freedom had come, but peace did not come with it. After long years of struggle, the country awoke in a new world, one where there was no longer a distant empire giving orders from across the ocean. Now decisions had to be made by its own people, and that proved difficult. Cities still bore the scars of war. The fields were weary, the people exhausted. They dreamed of peace, but did not yet know how to build it. In the 19th century, Venezuela searched for itself, like a person who had walked in darkness for a long time and suddenly stepped into the light. The eyes ached from the brightness, thoughts were confused, steps were uncertain. The country was young, fragile. Power changed often. Rulers came and went. Laws were rewritten. Everyone believed they knew the right path, but the truth was more complex. For many years, Venezuela lived between hope and disappointment. There were times when it seemed that peace had finally arrived, and there were days when the country slipped once more into chaos. People continued to live their everyday lives.
Farmers went out to the fields with the first rays of the sun. Fishermen headed to the sea before dawn. In the cities, shops opened and life moved on. History was made above, but sleep came below. In homes lit by candles, in the quiet where families whispered. The past was still close. It reminded people of itself through old wounds, unanswered questions. But gradually, the country learned. It learned how to be a state. It learned responsibility. It learned patience. Years passed. Generations replaced one another. Those who remembered colonial times faded away. In their place came people for whom Venezuela had always been independent. They grew up under the same sky, walked the same roads, but looked ahead. By the end of the 19th century, the country had grown calmer. Not perfect, but more stable. It began to understand that freedom is not a moment, but a journey, and that journey was still long. Night once again descended over plains and mountains. The stars shone just as they had centuries before. And Venezuela, having lived through a dream, fell asleep, preparing for a new era that was already approaching, quietly but inevitably. A new century began, and it arrived quietly. The sun rose over the same mountains. Rivers flowed as they always had. People woke up, unaware that beneath their feet lay a force capable of changing everything. At the beginning of the 20th century, Venezuela remained calm and simple. Life was unhurried, rural, predictable. But deep underground, oil was sleeping. It had rested there for thousands of years, asking for nothing. And one day, it was found. The first wells appeared in the west of the country, near the shores of Lake Maracaibo. The land grew loud. Machines broke the silence. Metal touched the soil. People watched the black liquid rise from the depths and did not immediately understand that they were seeing the future. Oil brought money quickly in great amounts. The country began to change before everyone's eyes. Roads grew longer, cities grew taller, lights grew brighter. People moved from villages to cities, searching for work and a new life. Nights stopped being dark. Street lights illuminated them. The hum of cars replaced the chirping of insects. It seemed that progress was the answer to every question. But change always arrives with two faces. Rapid growth brought dependence on oil, on the outside world, on prices decided somewhere far away. While some grew rich, others remained on the margins. And yet, in everyday life, people still found peace. In the evenings, families gathered together. They cooked food, listened to the radio, laughed. Music filled the homes. Guitars sounded soft and warm. The 20th century moved forward, asking no permission. Governments changed. New ideas arrived. Old fears faded. Wars in other countries felt distant. Venezuela lived by its own rhythm, sometimes confident, sometimes uncertain. But time did not stop. By the end of the century, it became clear oil had given much, but it had taken away silence. The country grew loud, complex, contradictory. And yet, beneath all that noise, there remained the same sky, the same mountains, the same night. And when the cities finally fell asleep, Venezuela once again became quiet, preparing for the next morning, for the next era. Time has reached our days, unhurried, as it always does. Modern Venezuela wakes and falls asleep beneath the same sky as it did thousands of years ago. The world around has grown faster, louder, more complex, but night here still knows how to be quiet. Cities live by their own rhythm, by day noisy, by night tired. Lights slowly fade in the windows of homes, streets empty, the air becomes softer. People return home, to families, to memories, to hopes. Life in Venezuela in the 21st century is not easy. It knows hardship. It knows change. It knows waiting. But it also knows the warmth of human voices, children's laughter, music that plays even when it feels like strength is gone. In homes, food is prepared as it always has been,
recipes are passed down from generation to generation. Old stories still live in the voices of grandparents, stories of the land, of the past, of how everything passes. People look toward the future in different ways, some with worry, some with hope. But almost everyone carries within a love for this land.